This is my presentation about the role of biases in criminal profiling. The class is Psychology 175. A small presentation overview is how do biases affect police profiling and judgment. The main points are what is profiling, evidence for bias in profiling, studies and specifics, what is the significance, and also what should we do about it. Criminal profiling. The technical definition is the process of using crime scene evidence to make inferences about potential suspects, including personality characteristics and psychopathology. It's different than racial profiling. Racial profiling. The dictionary definition is the use of race or ethnicity as grounds for suspecting someone of having committed an offense, commonly confused with one another, though they are not the same. Racial bias and other biases still play a role in criminal profiling, however. This can be through implicit bias or confirmation bias. Evidence for bias in criminal profiling. Kostis and Hayes, 2004. Perceived credibility of a criminal profiler affects police perception of a profile's accuracy. The profile itself was exactly the same given to each participant. The perception of the profile influenced the accuracy outcomes. Basically, the profile itself was the same, but the police's perception of each profile was different. Method. Police officers were given a profile of a criminal and told that it was written by a professional profiler or an unspecified author. They were asked to judge the perceived accuracy of each profile and report it to the researchers. Basically, each author was a different profiler. Criminal profiling. It has many facets, including the FBI criminal profilers and other facets such as arson investigations and other serious crime investigations. There are many different facets, and they can range from local police all the way up to federal police and national police. Results of the study. The police officers tended to rate profiles that were said to be true by a professional profiler as more accurate. This was independent of the actual content of the profile. This is explained by the ambiguity of profiles, and this ambiguity can greater influence the effects of profile perception on perceived accuracy. Study 2. Dabney et al. 2006. This study was aimed to assess the biases of people when engaging in criminal profiling. It took place at a store in Atlanta. Basically, regular people were asked to observe other regular people and report their behavior to the researchers. Methods. Observation was done with 16 CCTV cameras placed around the store. Every third shopper was followed by the CCTV cameras unless they showed no signs of shoplifting behavior. Then, another shopper was chosen instead of the first shopper. They were to observe and report people and describe their presence with a profile. Observers were not able to overcome their implicit bias and stereotypes when profiling potential shoplifters. They were instructed to focus on behavior and not physical characteristics. This means that there was strong evidence that implicit bias exists in profiling. These were the results of the study. Basically, people were not able to overcome their confirmation bias and chose out specific stereotypes of people that they already believe were likely to shoplift, and they created profiles based on those biases. Study 3, Marshall et al., 2007. It aimed to investigate how people's views of criminal profiles are influenced by their own beliefs. It was a study of lay people and their biases. This means that they were regular, common people, and the study aimed to investigate how people's beliefs influence profiles. Methods. Participants were instructed to complete an online questionnaire. This is how the researchers collected their data. It explored how representative heuristic and cognitive elaboration affected the perception of profiles. People were given disconfirming evidence, which is evidence that was contrary to a certain person committing a crime. The results of this study were that people who used more cognitive elaboration were less likely to change their decisions when faced with disconfirming evidence. People using a representative heuristic showed the opposite. This was more influential when presented before participants were presented with a suspect, meaning that people who saw a profile before a suspect were more likely to be swayed rather than after they saw a suspect. And the basic summary of this study is that people with cognitive elaboration were less likely to be wrong about the suspect. Study 4, Beryl et al., 2008. This study was about the false recognition effect. This effect occurs when a participant insists they remembered a detail they read from a criminal profile instead of insisting that they knew it. Some details were actually false and not included in the profile at all. Methods. Participants were asked if they remembered details in a criminal profile after a time delay. False details were given to participants. Results. Participants had a surprisingly high rate of correct recollection of information. This was even 1 week after the profiles were presented to the participants. This may be only specific to this study, however. This can highlight biases in people, as biases can influence memory. And false details are basically details that never actually occurred in relation to the crime. They were just presented by the researchers in order to test correct recollection of memory. And these people's memory was altered by their biases. And therefore, it can prove the existence of biases, changing memory, and the existence of biases in criminal profiling. Study 5, Grew et al., 2022. It examined how media profiling affected people's perceptions of real-life profiling. The researchers hypothesized that media profiling and watching crime TV shows actually does affect the perception of real-life profiling. And this is supported by the study. The results are here. Methods. Researchers used online surveys to survey the perception of online profiling. There were 734 participants. They consisted mostly of questions that measured the public's trust of criminal profiling. It assessed if public thought profiling was effective. Results. Higher consumption of profiling media resulted in better opinions of real-life profiling. This was consistent with the researchers' hypothesis. Perceptions of police profiling are actually impeccably mirrored in perceptions of police profiling media. Profiling media can induce biases in profiling. What this means is that basically people who watched more crime TV shows and saw media representations of profiling were actually more likely to rate real-life criminal profiling by police officers as being more accurate. And this is important because it highlights the fact that even media can cause biases. Significance. The significance of this is that it illustrates that there is flaws in the current profiling system, and that leads to bias and unjust treatment of people suspected of a crime. Many biases can lead to police harassment and imprisonment of suspects that may be innocent but fit a certain stereotype or bias. For instance, this can be present in the day-to-day level of police activity, as police can arrest a suspect that fits a certain stereotype or has certain behavior, even though they have no evidence of certain relation to a crime. This can be present in just proximity, race, or other factors. What should we do about it? We should improve and amend police profiling practices. We should create bias training for police officers, and we should educate the public about stereotyping and premature judgment. Basically, the gist of it is that we should create programs for police officers to be educated about the confirmation bias and the availability heuristic, and how these certain cognitive influences can shape and change the entire process of profiling. In addition, we need to educate the public about stereotyping, because police officers are also the same as regular people, and if many people in the public acknowledge bias, then police officers will be able to be swayed as well. It needs to be a cultural phenomenon in which all people are aware of bias, and this is the only way in which real change can be made in order to reform the police profiling practices that we see today. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope that you can take something from this presentation, primarily not to judge a book by its cover and to actually dig deeper. This applies to police profiling, as it should be focused on the facts and the evidence rather than biases such as the confirmation bias and the availability heuristic, which are cognitive influences. These are my sources. They are all peer-reviewed sources from Google Scholar. It's all the studies included in my presentation, Kostis et al., Dabney et al., and Grew et al. These studies detail certain experiments about bias and how it affects police profiling. Here are more studies. These are the last two studies from Marshall et al. And Bennell et al. These are also peer-reviewed from Google Scholar. It highlights that peer-reviewed sources are more trustworthy in their conclusions, and that we should only use credible sources in drawing conclusions.